that and make that happen. So I look forward to hearing from Richard. I think you will be challenged, but as we said this morning, we are up for the challenge of rethinking what we need to do as a union if we're going to win. So thank you.
Thank you, Nadine. It's always a worry in the era of Google when someone says, "Oh, I've found something interesting about this person." You think, "Oh, this could go anywhere." So, no, look, thank you, Nadine, for inviting me along today. And yes, Michael Flood was a wonderful contributor to the Australia Institute when I first started working there many years ago. And yeah, let me just start. I mean, most people don't know what a think tank is, and I'm proud if people want to call us a battle tank, because I'm an escapee from academia. I like academia. I'm glad other people do it, but no, I am. Like, I think it's really important work. It wasn't for me, because I actually wanted my research to kind of engage with public debate. I wanted the research that I did to drive change, and unfortunately, because of a lot of the pressures that the universities are under, similar to public sector organisations more generally, most academics now are either too busy or too afraid to actually go and participate actively in public debate. There are wonderful individual examples who do, but structurally, culturally, it's very hard work to do with inside a university now. So I escaped. When I left, my professor said, "But Richard, you're giving up tenure." I said, "I know, but you hate your life." And he kind of slumped a little bit and said, "Yeah, fair call." And I said, "By the way, my job's a lot worse than yours." So he was a professor, I was a junior academic. So yeah, we do battle on a daily basis with people who talk bullshit. I really need to say it as clearly as that. So much of what you and Australians are told about the economy is just bullshit. But it's spoken by credentialed people in expensive suits, and they say it authoritatively, and they say it in one voice, and they've said it for so long that even though it hasn't actually persuaded people, it's silenced them. You know, people find it really hard to say simple things like Australia is one of the lowest tax countries in the developed world. So I'll just say it again. Australia is one of the lowest tax countries in the developed world. This is what we used to call a fact, you know, and it's one of those facts that comes out of, you might have heard of it, it's an international left-wing progressive think tank called the IMF. Have you heard of them? Yeah, that's right. Anti-market kind of statist front for the socialists, I think. Working in cahoots with other well-known, you know, proto-Trotskyists like the OECD and the World Bank. I shit you not. Like, the data is hidden in full view on their websites. But when Joe Hockey stands up and says that the burden of tax, that's like this backpack of bricks that we all carry around, isn't it? Like, the burden of tax is what's stifling economic activity in Australia. This is bullshit. But when it's said again and again and again and it's not confronted, right, it gets a life of its own. People think it's kind of true. It's just simply not. So this week, I woke up on Tuesday and yesterday morning to see our research on the front page of that left-wing organ, The Australian. And our research, we do a lot of research on tax. It's not the only thing we do, but I'll come to why I think it's amongst the most important, if not politically the most important. And the work that the Oz is reporting this week is around negative gearing. And it suggests that 50% of the cost of tax concessions for negative gearing, 50% goes to the wealthiest 10% of Australians. Right? Half of the benefit goes to the top 10. Almost none of the benefit goes to the bottom 20. This is kind of what I like to think of as unfair or inequitable. But when you put a fact like that out there, and you know, I'm standing by that fact, no one's actually criticised it, but Joe Hockey's out this week saying, no, that's not true. A lot of middle class people negatively gear. Yeah, Joe, didn't say they didn't. What I said was that half of the benefit goes to the top 10%. To which he responds, yes, but I've met a middle-class person who negatively gears. To which I say, yep, and half of the benefit goes to the top 10. But do you see what they do? Oh, no, Richard's trying to play some class war with his facts. I know someone. Great, we all know someone who negatively gears. It's not evil, it's just really expensive. And strangely, most of the benefits go to people who own a lot of houses. And guess who they are? Do you think they're the rich or the poor? Oh no, let's not even talk about that. Let's just talk about the middle. And I found someone in the middle who negatively gears. The same is true for tax concessions on superannuation. Of course, middle class people get some benefit. And fine, if that's what we want to do, that's what we want to do. Right? It's a democracy. We can deliver benefits to anyone we want. We've created a system where 30% of the costs of tax concessions go to the top 10% of income earners. And after 2017, low-income earners will pay more tax on their super than they do on their ordinary income. Now that sounds like a shit idea to me. But it's a democracy. We can make as dumb a decision as we want. But let's be clear about it. Let's be honest about it. Let's call it for what it is. And if you like the status quo, then defend it. That's fine. And if you don't like it, then propose change. But to defend a system where 50% of negative gearing benefits and 30% of superannuation benefits go to the top 10% of the public, but to defend that by pretending it's not true for a long time, and then finally when you're under some scrutiny say, yeah, sure, but someone in the middle gets something, it's not really a defence of it. It shows you how weak, how intellectually and politically weak the people that are defending this stuff is. Under sustained criticism, the best they can do is to kind of say, yeah, well, maybe, but if we define the question differently, I can get a different answer. All of the numbers that we use come straight out of your good members at the ATO, you know, lefties one and all, you know, 94%. Well, coming to Nadine's point, yeah, we do, you know, by the way, when Rio Tinto said their mine extension would create 44,000 jobs, my evidence was, I don't know how many jobs it would create, but I'd guess about 0. They went with 44,000, I went with not sure, but about 0. This is what we like to call a big difference. We won. The judge said their claims were implausible, incredible, unpersuasive, and not backed up by the data. But that doesn't have to be backed up by the data, because if no one challenges you on it, you just get away with it. Point being, I was in another mining case this week up in Queensland, and there was a guy from the ATO at the back taking notes when the miners were making claims about their profits. I thought, this is good. This is good. Well done, ATO. All right. What I'm trying, sorry, I don't use PowerPoint. I think power corrupts and PowerPoint corrupts absolutely. Because I want people like you, I'd like to give you facts and arguments that help you convince someone else of these things. And unless you get to talk to people at barbecues with PowerPoint, then me using... But do you see, like I can get up here and be all experty and put a whole bunch of graphs up here, but unless you carry a bunch of graphs around with you when you're talking to people, it's not going to help. So if I don't need any graphs to persuade you, then you shouldn't need any graphs to persuade anyone else. So let me move on to the key points that I do want to make. And the upside of not using PowerPoint is that the minute Nadine says, Richard, it's time to sit down, I say, great, I was just about to wrap up. All right, I don't have to whip through those last 20 slides. So here is my main point. You want to reframe a debate or listen carefully to what I'm about to say. This is what I like to call true. Conservatives love budget deficits. They love them. They love budget deficits. Let me say it again. Conservatives love budget deficits. Budget deficits are essential to the Conservative political strategy, which is to cut public spending. Deficits are the best excuse to cut spending on services that the public likes. Deficits are the problem that gives them an excuse to do what they always wanted to do, which is employ fewer public sector workers, and not just CPSU, public sector workers, teachers, nurses, you name it. Let me say it again, they love deficits. Deficits allow them to say to my mum, I'd like to employ more teachers too, but we just can't afford it. Haven't you seen how big the deficit is? You all know that if you poll someone cold and say, would you like better quality public services or lower quality public services, everyone says better. This is not hard. You've already won the messaging fight. You've won. All right? You didn't even have to show up to win it. All right? The vast majority of the Australian public would like to see higher quality services. But what they don't want is to have burdensome tax and enormous budget deficits. So lying about tax and lying about deficits is central to the political strategy of the people who've beaten the shit out of us for the last 20 years. Right? They have to have deficits. And you know what the best way to get a budget deficit is? This is the clever part. The people that are beating the shit out of us are not stupid. Right? They seem stupid, but they're not stupid. How do you cause budget deficits? Well, when the economy's going well, cut taxes for rich people. And, right, so when the economy's going well, cut taxes for rich people. A lot. And do it through things like tax concessions for superannuation. Do it through things like 50% discount on capital gains tax that nobody understands. All right, it's not an accident, but the people getting the money understand. No, they're not interested in the message, they're interested in the cash. So when the economy's doing well and money's coming in, like at the beginning of a mining boom, cut taxes for rich people. And in turn, cause budget deficits in 5 or 7 years' time when the economy inevitably slows down. And when the economy inevitably slows down and we have a budget emergency, what's the only way to fix a budget emergency? Oh, that'd be cutting services, wouldn't it? I call it the right-wing ratchet. Don't laugh, it works. It's bloody scary. They got away with it for 2 decades. When times are good, cut taxes, because that's popular. All right? And most people don't understand. And the headline just said cut taxes, and 90% of it went to rich people. All right? Just accidentally, you know. And then, when cutting taxes inevitably means that when things slow down, you don't have nearly as much revenue as you thought you would, go, oh, bugger me, everyone knows that deficits are bad, and I'm the responsible kind of conservative that doesn't want to recklessly rack up debt. Sure, I recklessly cut the bejesus out of tax, but let's not go backwards, let's look forwards. All right, and I'm the responsible kind of guy who says we have to cut spending on the poor, to do otherwise would hurt future generations. And God knows I care so much about future generations I couldn't give a shit about climate change. But these are the people who are winning. Well, let's be clear, right? They're thumping us. It's 20-0 at half time. And they're doing it because, here's my point to you. They use abstract but ridiculous economic arguments to win political fights. Okay? They got a political beef with the public sector. They got a political beef with the manufacturing sector. So if they cut taxes and go after free trade, then they do over the union movement. It's not rocket science. Okay? And it's working. It's working a treat. Now, so step one, Richard's main point, they love deficits. They cut taxes not only to deliver cash to their friends in the short term, but to cause pain for their enemies in the long term. This is good, this is strategic, this is working well, and we need to counter it. Now, so that's my first point. The second point is, and please don't take this the wrong way, I don't think it's deliberate on the part of the unions. I think you're a victim of it, not the cause of it. But you've been set up to play what I call the hungry mile of budget advocacy, where in the lead up to budget, the teachers are saying, don't hurt teachers, people like teachers. And the nurses are saying, don't hurt nurses, people hurt nurses. And the CPSU says, don't hurt, it's harder to sell public servants as a general thing, but you do know we do important work, don't you? Which of course you do, and sacking people at the ATO would perhaps be a genius way to let your rich friends off, collect less tax, and then cause a deficit, which means you can cut the pension in 5 years' time. So the whole left kind of queues up and says, either don't cut me when the Libs are in, or please could I have a little bit from Labor? But here's the hungry mile. Every time the right wins a fight about cutting tax, you lost. You lost. In the long run, you lost. You might not see that you lost, but you lost. So when they succeed in pushing taxes down and down and down, and they're way lower than they were when Howard left office, they're way lower than the OECD average, they're way lower than, we're low by historic and international standards. They've won at cutting taxes. The hungry mile is that individual campaigns have to then say, well, someone's going to lose, please don't let it be me. All right, please don't pick off the teachers. We've run a really expensive TV ad campaign. By the way, I don't begrudge them doing this. I'm saying they're doing their job, but their job is to fight against other sectors, saying, well, someone's going to get cut, but please not me. And in the long run, you're all going to get cut. No, that's the hungry mile. It's there to keep you all desperate. All right? So there's only one strategic solution. It's to collect more tax revenue. Because unless you're actually growing the pie of how much tax revenue there is, then you're fighting against other public sector unions or other demands on the public purse. Please don't spend money on renewable energy, employ teachers instead. Right? That's the sound of losing. Right? I know there has to be cuts this year because you cut taxes and we couldn't possibly undo that. So if someone has to be cut, please don't pick me and my members. That's the sound of losing. So, by the way, I call it the right-wing ratchet. In America, they call it starving the beast. Do you know what the beast is? Public sector, right? So tax cuts, always tax cuts from the right, particularly the Tea Party, but it happened before the Tea Party. They just call it starving the beast, right? They know that everybody likes the beast. They know that people want services. They like ambulance drivers. They like teachers. They like nurses. They like police. They like the army. They like all the things that taxes pay for. But if they can always be saying, but it's irresponsible because look at that deficit, they win. So I call it the right-wing ratchet. They call it starving the beast, but I don't like calling the public sector a beast. But in America, they go for that kind of stuff. Even the left doesn't seem to mind. But the strategy is the same. My point is you're not uniquely a victim of this. This is a good political strategy for the right. They've been implementing it effectively for decades, and it's not your fault that you're kind of getting crushed in the middle of it. But I am saying the only way to solve it is to come up a level. You have to get out of, well, we're stuck with the amount of revenue there is, please don't sack my members. Right? I just don't think you'll win in the long run if that's your strategy. But the upside of this is it gives you something incredibly in common with the teachers, with the nurses, with the AMBOs, with the firefighters, with the police. All of them would benefit from the same strategy. Now, I'm not saying that stop everything you're doing, forget about everything the union's working on, just go become tax reform idiots like Richard. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that if it's no one's job to win a fight about more tax revenue, then the right are beating you. Okay, I'm not saying you should stop doing everything else and start doing this, but unless your union, teachers, nurses, and everyone that benefits from a bigger public sector, unless you all put some more effort into winning this fight, it's a zero-sum game. Right? If the right are winning the fight about tax, then you're losing it. And when you lose a fight about tax, it's only a matter of time before some part of the public sector gets cut to balance the budget. So a lot of people tell me, yeah, that's all good, Richard, but you can't go to an election promising to increase tax, right? You'll just lose. That's just stupid. Yeah, because everyone in Australia loves Gina Rinehart. She just has that warmth about her, and the notion that she should perhaps pay more tax than she currently does, yeah, or some. Well, exactly, this is my point. The public actually love hearing that Google pays no tax. And when I say love hearing it, I mean because they love feeling that angry and being able to direct it at someone. So if you want to collect a lot more tax revenue, and if we did collect a lot more tax revenue, we'd still be a low tax country. Fact. If we wanted to go and collect a whole bunch more tax revenue, you don't actually have to increase tax rates on middle class people. There's no link between the two statements, we need more revenue and middle class people should pay more tax. That's the right talking. But the way to collect a lot more tax revenue is to close the loopholes and the concessions that disproportionately flow to the 10% of people who'll never vote Labor in their lives. This is not hard. But that's why when we get an article up saying 50% of the benefits of negative gearing go to the wealthiest 10%, that's why the right are all on message saying middle class people do well out of negative gearing. I met a middle class person who negatively geared because they're trying to convince you that it's political poison to go after the top 10% of people who pay stuff all tax. If I go to work all day, full time, and earn $100,000, and you buy and sell some assets and make $100,000 in a capital gain, you pay half as much tax as me. Income from capital gain is taxed at half the rate of income for PAYE earners. It's secretly titled the 50% capital gains tax discount. I mean, you'd never see through something like that, would you? You reckon you can't win an election saying, I think people who earn $50,000 a year from working their butt off shouldn't pay twice as much as tax as people who earn $50,000 buying and selling an asset? You reckon you can't sell that? That's the right talking. That's the right telling you you'd be mad to do something that would help 90% of people and hurt 10% of people who, let's face it, if they're going to vote Labor, they already do. Right? Of course there are high income earners who vote Labor, but they don't vote Labor because Labor promises them low tax. So the idea that in a democracy you can't deliver something for 90% of people and get away with it, talk about having our wings clipped for us. So let me just quickly talk about some specific things that we've been working on that kind of play into this space. We called recently, and this, I think, oh God, I didn't even know I was up there. I don't see myself in profile very often. Am I looking thin on top? Sometimes I think I might be getting. Oh God. What was I, before I was shocked at my own middle-aged appearance, what was I saying? So earlier, one of the sort of little Facebook pictures that Michael put up of me about the Buffett rule. All that basically says, and by the way, here's a tip: if you want to do things and you're worried they're impossible, ask yourself, has any other country ever done it? And if the answer is yes, then it's not impossible. So other countries have introduced effectively minimum tax rates, that it doesn't matter how good your accountant is, you have to pay a minimum rate of tax multiplied by your gross earnings. Okay, so yeah, sure, keep all your receipts for your pencils and your rubbers. That's great, all right? No one's coming after that. But we know from today's paper, and we've known it every year, that there are people in Australia who earn more than $1 million a year, who pay more than $800,000 a year for tax advice, and who don't pay a cent in tax. All right, we know this because of your members in the ATO. All right, it's in something enticingly called the tax stats, and it came out yesterday. All right, and we actually keep track of gross income, expenditure on accounting advice, net income, and tax paid. Right, and we know that there are people who spend $800,000 a year on accountants and not a cent on tax. And we could stop that. Right? You change the rules. And we call it the Buffett rule. It was first proposed in the US by Warren Buffett, who said, I pay less tax than lower rate of tax than my secretary. Yeah. Well, we do it in Australia, 50% capital gains tax discount. And he thought that was a crap idea. And he said, why don't you come up with a minimum rate of tax so no matter how good my accountant is, I'll always just have to pay that. This is not rocket science, this is just political will. Oh, but you'd never get Australians to agree to something like that. What's the right talking? Well, you'd never get them to. Well, Warren Buffett goes along with it. And by the way, you'll find plenty of rich people. Australia Institute's entirely philanthropically funded. They get no money from government. Every time I go on radio and talk about the inequality of the tax system, some rich person rings up and gives me money. True story. They ring up, they say, mate, you don't know the half of it. It's obscene what I get away with. I'm not kidding. Right? All of our tax work, every cent of it has been funded by rich people who think the system is obscene and want it changed. And every time I talk about it, some rich person hears it and says, mate, you're only scratching the surface. That's what you get if you spend 10 grand on tax advice. You should find out what happens when you spend 50 grand on tax advice. Well, what I don't know is what happens when you spend 500 grand on tax advice, because no one that rich has rung me up yet. But I'm not kidding, there are rich people out there that want the system fixed. You know, they like their kids, strangely enough. They like living in a country that's fair and has good services. So don't believe for a minute that everybody hates tax and everyone wants to avoid paying it. So the Buffett rule, something we've been working on a bit lately. Superannuation tax concessions, God forbid if anyone hears on my Facebook page, you know I've been talking about that since Facebook was invented. Dividend imputation credits. Oh, everyone's fallen asleep already. There are rich people out there who pay negative tax. No one understands this. You're not supposed to understand it. All right, but the 5% of people doing well out of it do. When Telstra, say Telstra posts you a cheque for $1,000 worth of dividends, they come with something called franking credits. And Telstra has already paid company tax, and company tax is actually, the company tax they've already paid in the hands of the person getting the dividend gets used against any other tax that the person getting the dividends have to pay. So if I'm in the 48% tax bracket, Telstra sends me a cheque for $1,000. It comes with 30%, $300 worth of franking credits. I got to pay 18% tax on the difference. 18% tax. But if all my income comes from superannuation and therefore it's tax-free, because if you're old in Australia and rich, you don't have to pay tax. Well, when Telstra sends me $300 worth of franking credits against my tax liability, I'm like, but I don't have a tax liability. I'm old and rich. So I take my $300 worth of franking credits that Telstra paid to the ATO, and you know what the ATO gives me? It's $300 cash. I pay negative tax. Someone... I think I just heard someone say, fuck off. It's true. All right, I'm not making this shit up. Oh, but you'd never get votes pointing this out to people. Let me be clear, you'd never win any votes highlighting this to people. So, dividend imputation, yawn, who cares about that? Well, people that don't want $30 billion worth of imputation credits given away every year. Did you hear that number? 30 billion? Right, that's the cost of imputation credits. You know how many countries in the world have dividend imputation? 4. You know how many of them allow the refund of excess imputation credits? 1. No, 1. Us. We're it. But the sky would fall, Richard, if you got rid of that.
Plus we pay to administer it.
What's that?
We pay to administer
Oh yeah, it costs a fortune to administer this. It actually costs the companies quite a lot. You know, the super funds, it's excruciating for them. By the way, everything I propose fits comfortably with the right-wing rhetoric that we need to simplify the tax system. Oh shit, yeah, we do. That's the number one thing I want, is a simpler tax system. Because all of the complexity is there to conceal how unfair it is. I love a simple tax system, and every time the right say simple, they mean lower. That's what simple means. Oh, we need to simplify the tax system. Oh, can we get rid of all the rorts? Well, no, Richard, no. We'll leave them in. So Buffett rule, superannuation, dividend imputation. I've talked about capital gains tax. You know, we just go on and on about tax at the Institute as well as a bunch of other things. But the reason we go on about tax is because, I hate to say it, there are plenty of groups out there in Australia that do a great job of saying, let's spend more money on the Indigenous disadvantage, closing the gaps. There are plenty of people out there saying we need to do more to protect old women who can't afford housing. There are plenty of people out there saying we need to spend more money on teachers and more money on nurses, and we need higher quality public services. That space does not need another voice in it. But all of those groups either fail or fight each other unless we collect some more tax.
Yeah.
You can't have 50 campaigns for greater funding and have no comprehensive campaign for more tax. And just to put your own members' interests at heart, do you reckon it's easier to get governments to spend money addressing disadvantage amongst old, poor women or employing CPSU members? Right, you have probably got one of the hardest campaigns you could possibly run. So in an environment where the revenue is shrinking, I don't think you've got much of a head start in the don't pick on me stakes. It is entirely in your self-interest to make sure that other people winning give us more money campaigns are not winning at your expense. Because in the lead up to the last election, remember, Tony Abbott made a virtue out of saying, vote for me and I'll sack 20,000 people.
Yeah.
But remember why he was opposed to the carbon tax? Oh, it would destroy jobs. He promised to destroy jobs. That's how kind of broken our economic debate is. So no one's given me the wrap up, but I feel like I've gone on for too long. So I think on that note, oh, look, now he's wrapping me up. I think on that note, I'll sit down. Thank you very much.
Thank you.